In this video we are going to be looking at imploding arrays, essentially converting them to strings. If you haven't already watched the Explode tutorial, I recommend you do so because this is going to get slightly more advanced. And obviously explode and implode are the same concept, just backwards. It makes sense to go ahead and watch Explode first since it's the more basic tutorial. So in this video we're going to look at Implode, what it does, and we're also going to look at a really useful example as well that you can start applying to your applications just to make them a lot more efficient and not run a bit better, but tidy the code up, just make it a bit more efficient. Okay, so what does Implode do? Well, in short, Implode does exactly the same as the opposite, of Explode. So let's take a look at an example. Let's go ahead and create an array. So I'm going to create an array names, which is a unimaginative example, and I'm going to include 3 names here. So I'm going to say Alex, Billy, and Tabby. So if I go ahead and implode these, well, first of all, what we have here, if we print our names and we go over to our browser, you see that we've got the first element at key 0 as Alex, Billy, Tabby. Fairly straightforward and obvious. However, Implode is going to convert this to a string and allow us to pass through a delimiter or something that we want to be between these values, essentially. So let's go ahead and echo implode. So we're echoing the result of this function, and remember, implode is going to take an array and it's going to output a string. That's really important. So we have a delimiter and then the value that we want to implode, so names. What do we want to implode by? I'm just going to say a comma. Makes sense. So when we refresh now, we have this list Alex, Billy and Tabby, comma separated. We don't have a nasty comma after this, which is brilliant. So this has done a really good job in one short line relatively quickly. Now another way we could have done this, which you might see and you probably should avoid, is using a for each and appending to a string. So for example, we could say for each names as name, and we could create a string up here. So we could say names str equals, we'll make that equal to null for now. We could say names str dot equals name and a comma. This needs to be full stop for concatenation. So this would work, right? We can go ahead and echo names str. There we go, we've done exactly the same thing, but we've got this comma on the end. So in here what we would need to do is an if statement, and we would have to say if, we need to include the key first. And key, remember, is 0, 1, 2, however many values. So if the key is equal to the count of names minus 1, because remember the count is going to be from 1 and the indexing of the array is going to be from 0, then this would be outside of the if statement, and we would get rid of this, and names str dot equals a comma, only if it doesn't equal. There we go. So you can already see it's starting to get more complicated than it's required. However, now we have the result like this. I just thought it was worthwhile pointing out the long route of doing this when Implode does more or less this for us, and we can specify this this delimiter. So now that we know what Implode does, it's relatively straightforward, but what the hell would we ever use this for? Well, the answer is it's really, really good at joining long strings that, for example, you wanted to input into a database. So we'll take a look at this. Now, if, for example, I was taking or registering a user on a system or creating a guestbook entry or something like that, I might have something like data is equal to array. And this would be within a submit after you've submitted some data. So you collect and process all your data up here. that's important. You would probably sanitize it, I don't know, do anything like that, validation, stuff that you would usually do. Then you would perhaps create an array called data and pass this through to a guestbook processing function that would then insert this into a database. Now, it sounds very complicated, but we're obviously not going to get into that because we're looking at imploding and the usefulness of imploding. So I'm going to bring this down a bit, and we're going to look at doing this in a slightly different way than you might have seen, and that is to specify the name of the key. And that's called an associative array. So the data that we store here, and each element has an associative key. So for example, name, my name could be Alex, or this would be something like name, and then name would apply up here. And remember, this data would be taken from the form that the user had filled in, you've validated, submitted, blah, blah, blah. So name, I could say email, and then again up here, email would be listed there, and then message, for example. There, okay? So, let's go ahead and just include the message here. And if you're unsure what's going on, I'll take a moment just to briefly explain. I understand this is going to be painful for people that already know, what this is and how it works. So we've processed our data, or we could have, with theoretically saying, we could have posted this. We're creating an array called data, which we're going to implode in a minute to create a query to pass through to our database. That's the idea of this. And then we have an associative array. We've got a key called name, which holds the value Alex. Email holds the value alex@phpacademy.org, and the message with the really great site, love it message. So if we go ahead and print R on this data, it's obvious what it has in it, but it just gives us a chance to see this, and it's good practice to go through and do things like this. So name is Alex, email is this, message is this. Perfect. Now I want to create a query from this, and you'd usually go ahead and use the MySQL query option, but I'm just going to say SQL equals something. Now what we would do here is we would say insert into table, and we would include here the names of the fields. So for example, name, email, message, and then we would say values, and we would include the values here. So we would say name, email, blah 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 blah. Let me just create this with double quotes so we don't get mixed up. Okay, so yeah, we would usually go ahead and just say name, blah blah blah, and that would just insert the data there. However, we want to sort of make this process a lot easier, so all we need to change is this, this, and this. If we need another field on, like the timestamp, for example, or the time this was posted, we could just go ahead and do this, and all of this would be generated for us. And that's how we're going to use Implode here to demonstrate this. So I'll go ahead and crack on with the example. So here I'm going to say value equals name, email, and message, and I'm going to go ahead and echo SQL, and then we're going to modify the SQL string, because you can see here, insert into table, name, email, message, values, alex@phpacademy.org, really great site, love it. This would be our query, and that would insert the data. So what can we do to modify this? Well, let's go ahead and say fields SQL equals, now we want to generate a list of fields that we're going to pass through into here. Now how do we do this? We could loop through this array, take each key, append it to a string, and then pass this string into here. But we're going to use Implode to make that a lot easier. So we want to implode. Now the data we want to pass through is data, but what we don't want to do is pass through data because it will say alex@phpacademy.org, and really great site, love it. We want to pass through the keys. So we use array keys here, basic. Now if I was to just comma separate this now just to demonstrate, and I were to die fields SQL, this is the result we get: name, email, message. As I said, if we don't use array keys, the following will happen. There, we have the actual data, so we obviously need to use array keys. Now, we need to make it look like this. We need to make it have a backtick here, a backtick here, a comma here, a space, a backtick. Well, the space is optional, but a backtick, backtick with a comma, sorry. So how are we going to do this? Well, we can't bung it all in here, it's just not going to work. So think about this logically. We have a backtick at the start and we have a backtick at the end. So let's just get rid of them for now. In the middle of name, email and message, we have backtick, comma, space, backtick. Backtick, comma, space, backtick. And that will always be the same continuing down. So here if we put a backtick, comma, space, backtick, and then we add a backtick here, concatenate that onto the result of this implode, which will be a string, and then a backtick at the end, these will appear here, and between each of these we'll have a backtick, comma, and a backtick, backtick, comma, and a backtick. So hopefully that makes sense. We're going to kill the script here, not run anything else, and output this fields SQL, and we'll see how this looks. And almost like magic, we've got name contained within backticks, a comma, email contained within backticks, a comma, message. Brilliant. We've really harnessed the power of Implode here and taken these keys and created this data. So what we can do now is get rid of all of this junk, and we can go ahead and pass in fields SQL. Perfect. So now we're going to echo out the SQL, and you'll see that it just looks like it did before, yet we've got this a massive amount of flexibility now here, to do what we want. Okay, so now we want to include the values as well. So values SQL is equal to, now this one's a lot easier, but we need to do a bit of escaping, so it's going to start to look a bit weird, but I guess that's a really good learning point. I'm going to use single quotes because I always use single quotes for strings unless double quotes are required for these within. That's not the point. I could have escaped these. But let's go and do it my hard, difficult way, and I'll maybe explain the other way as well. I don't want to bore you. Okay, so the values here is the same. We use explode again. We want to explode by something, but this time we just want to pass in data because we want the actual data values. Now, we want to go ahead and do exactly the same thing. We're concatenating two things on either side. We've got one here, these are single quotes now, and then within we've got single quote, comma, space, single quote, comma, space, single quote. So we've got exactly the same thing. So we just need a single quote in here, which has now confused this, so we need to escape it with a backslash, and we need a single quote in here, which we need to escape with a backslash. Now, as I said before, you can use double quotes here and a single quote in between. I just think it looks better with single quotes and escaping characters, but it's entirely up to you. So here we're going to have a single quote, a comma, and a single quote. We're going to need to escape that single quote and escape that single quote as well. So essentially we've got exactly the same thing as we've got here, yet just with single quotes, because that's how we apply this within an SQL query. So now all we need to do is say values SQL in there, and you will not see a difference because it's exactly the same. I'm refreshing, and we have this generated content. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to look at the whole reason behind actually doing this in the first place. Well, if for example another field needs to be added to the database table and another field needs to be taken into account here, it's extremely easy to manage this now. So for example, if we were taking their telephone number, we would then go ahead and specify a variable here, telephone is equal to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and now you'll see this has been added, and this has been added. That's it. All we've done is specify the data that we want to pass through. And this is also useful when you're not sure what data is going to be included. For example, they might not have supplied their email address, in which case this will all automatically update to not include their email address, because we're specifying which fields we're posting which data to. So it will automatically not include their database. Obviously, this is a very, not obscure, but very unique circumstances. But, in this case, what we've done is something that really allows flexibility. And we've done that just using one function, the implode function, with the delimiter, and we've carefully constructed this. So it works with the query really, really well. And this is one of my favorite examples of using this. So hopefully now you've sort of got to grips with implode. Hopefully this hasn't confused too much, but take a look over it, and once you get the hang of this, it really makes sense. And to start applying it to what you're doing gives you that extra part or extra bit of flexibility.